Chap, you have very helpfully brought out for us how family instability can be an inhibitor to joy, and how the church, by adopting young people in a place of stable relationship, can create space for joy even in the midst of suffering. I want to ask you to address a particularity that used to happen so often in my youth ministry. We really want to create communities of trust, small places where young people can be vulnerable with one another and with young adults. And in those spaces, you could just be sure that in this particular community, 2 or 3 young people, when they were talking about their deepest dreads or fears, would say, "My dad left and I don't know if I'll ever see him again. My mom and dad are fighting every night. I'm worried they're going to break up. I haven't seen my dad for so long because he's on the road all the time, and I'm worried that he and my mom are going to divorce." In that particular instance, where every youth minister is going to face some version of that, what are the resources of scripture, of spirituality, of devotional literature, of ways of being in ministry that can address that particularity as you walk with that child?
That's a really important question, because anybody that actually works with young people in any part of the world is going to, once a bridge of trust is built, regardless of how healthy their family is, that kid will begin to unpack what they experience as difficult. And every young person around the world has some level of difficulty, if not trauma. And so it's going to happen, and it's going to happen quite frequently as you build bridges of trust, not walls of trust. So as they cross that threshold of trusting us, and they begin to share some of the things you mentioned, let's say a young person comes to you after a small group and you've been meeting over a Bible study or a topic, and God's at the center, you prayed, and the kid goes, "Can I talk to you?" And yeah, my dad hit my mom last night and walked out, and I don't know if I'll ever see him again. And the child's 15 years old. What do? Well, most people in ministry would go, what are the practices? What are the words? What is the stuff that I can pour into in order for that young person to feel some sense of stability, if not safety, and maybe even joy out of that? Obviously, if we say, count it joy. Come on, kid, buck up. Well, that would be the extreme, and most of us would know that is crazy, dumb. But even the idea of just throwing scripture at a kid, just the idea of throwing a practice, saying, well, why don't you and I get together and why don't you just pray for 5 minutes every day and see what the Lord happens to do? We can give them great advice. That's not what they're looking for when they come to us to trust us. They don't come to us so that we can pour content into them from a distance. And we talked about this, we framed everything we did last night we are incubators of God's joy for them. To be an incubator is to be very tender and gentle and kind. The best model we have for this kind of ministry you're talking about, very particular ministry, is 1 Thessalonians 2, where the Apostle Paul says, first, our visit to you was not a failure. We have to be incarnational in our attitude and in our spirit when a kid trusts us enough with a particular situation. An incarnational attitude is not to come at them with advice, not to tell them what to do, but first come alongside. As Henry Nouwen reminds us, his definition of compassion is to suffer with another. Cum pati, to suffer with. That has got to be our default response, is thank you for sharing that. Let me come alongside you. Before we even say a word, let me step into what you are feeling and experiencing. Tell me more of what you're going through right now. I long to understand so that you know someone is standing with you and suffering with you. Most of the scriptures, especially in the pastoral way that the scriptures describe what God does for us in the midst of suffering, is he says, I am with you. Be afraid not. The Psalms is beautiful in the Psalms of Lament. After we have come alongside, then 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 7 and 8, the Apostle Paul says, like a mother, and the word is actually a nursing mother, we were gentle among you. We loved you so much we gave you not only the gospel of God content, but our very lives as well. So dear you had become to us. That's 1 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8. So first, it is this come alongside, suffer with. And our second practice is to engage not in advice but in identification of when things are hard for me, I need someone to stand with me. So it's not just our presence, but it's our active, proactive, incarnational presence where a kid can say, I can hold on to you relationally, knowing that you have also suffered and yet you experience joy. And then the third level is to provide the gospel of God. God is real with us, and there is hope because there's a bigger story where God is taking you in the midst of the suffering. So those three things. We incarnate in our attitude and spirit as we come alongside. Secondly, we allow ourselves to identify and even have conversations where our story, a kid can say, I can align with you and see that you have hope in the midst of your story. And thirdly, we point them to the hope in Jesus Christ. And that is what you do every single time. That may take you 1 hour, 2 days, 5 years. But all the resources in the midst of those things is that progression. And so in that progression of alongside, identification, sharing common story, and then pointing to the hope in Jesus Christ is what we have to offer kids as the church and in youth ministry.